Our News on Terror segment tonight. Good news for the U.S.-backed forces in the fight against the Islamic State. U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces now control approximately half of the Islamic State's capital of Raqqa. But U.S. military commanders refuse to put a timeline on their operation. So when can we expect ISIS to finally be defeated? Watch.
If you go back to 2014, they were a dramatically expanding movement. Since then, they've lost about 70,000 square kilometers, and in the last 6 months alone, they've lost about 20 square kilometers. So 1/3 of their losses in Iraq and Syria have taken place over the last 6 months. So it's radically shrinking. The people that are under their domain, less and less every day. You know, our operations enabled by coalition forces, with Iraqi forces doing the fighting, Syrian Democratic Forces doing the fighting. About 5 million people who used to be living under ISIS are no longer living under ISIS. And more importantly, if you think about where we were back in 2014, the refugee and migrant flow, remember the hundreds of thousands of people fleeing out of Iraq and Syria, we've actually now reversed that. So in Iraq, 2 million Iraqis are now back in their homes in areas that used to be controlled by ISIS. And even in Syria now, the first 6 months of this year, we've actually seen, according to UN statistics, Syrians beginning to return to their homes. That's a pretty remarkable trend line that we want to continue.
With me now is the National Security and Foreign Policy reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation, Sagar Enjeti. Sagar, what a difference a commander-in-chief can make. Under Trump, the gains against ISIS have dramatically accelerated. What changed?
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. And you're exactly onto something. President Trump has loosened the rules of engagement against ISIS. He's told his U.S. military commanders that he is no longer going to be managing the number of troops on the ground from the White House, which is something that the Obama administration insisted on doing. And he's basically let the U.S. Air Force bomb, basically whoever they would like to, in terms of both in Iraq and Syria, against al-Qaeda in Yemen. But most importantly, I think, is that the president has greenlit the arming of the Syrian Democratic Forces directly with U.S. military weapons. And that's something that some of our allies were kind of iffy about. That's because Turkey, which is a NATO ally and it was pretty close, they border Syria. And they are very, very against parts of the people that we back because they say they are Kurdish terrorists. So even though our Syrian Democratic Forces are doing a really good job against ISIS right now, there could be some geopolitical woes for the Trump administration down the road.
There certainly is question in that area because a lot of people say, oh, well, you're arming the good guys, but are they really the good guys? And are they going to turn around and use their weapons and our information against us later? So and you don't think there's anything to worry about? You think this is the greatest strategy and the best move?
Well, no, there are a few things to worry about. I mean, let's look at it this way. I mean, we have given weapons to people for decades in order to fight groups that we didn't like. And almost every time that didn't work out very well for us. The Pentagon has told us that they have the serial numbers of all of the weapons that they have given over. And they say, and apparently they say they have a tracking mechanism where they can get those weapons back. Realistically, do you know anybody who's going to take free, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons and then give them back, especially when there's no real mechanism, put in place in the first place? But again, these are something that the Pentagon and the Trump administration really doesn't want to focus on because they're solely focused on their gains against ISIS, which are really important. But a lot of experts are warning that we could pay the price for this down the line.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because that reminds me of all the videos that we've seen of Islamic State fighters, on top of our U.S. tanks on the streets. And it's like, how did they even get those? Now there's more concern now that, the Islamic State is basically fleeing Raqqa. Some of them are actually slipping out, dressing as civilians or trying to pose as civilians. And that's something that we talk a lot about here at One America News, is that a lot of these refugees, some of them are terrorists because terrorists are taking advantage of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's so disgusting and it's insidious. They are dressing themselves up as women. They're strapping suicide bombs to themselves. I mean, just last week, a U.S. military commander told me that a man deployed his pregnant wife with a suicide vest to pose as a civilian, go amongst the flows, get as close to the U.S. troops and the Syrian Democratic Forces as possible, blew herself up, and she killed a lot of civilians. And we know ISIS propaganda has been encouraging people to pose as vulnerable civilians and as refugees to to get into Europe. I mean, look at the Paris attacks, probably the worst terrorist attack since 9/11 that the world has seen. And what did we see? I mean, 2 of the people that were in the Paris attack entered Europe as posing as refugees. This is a threat that the world needs to wake up to and that they refuse to acknowledge because it's, it goes against their humanitarian values. But the fact is that the safety and security of government citizens should probably be paramount.
Yeah, it is alarming. And also, as they get more desperate, they have to come up with new ways to funnel money to each other. And apparently they're using eBay. A jihadi in the U.S. was using eBay to get money from the Islamic State. Explain.
Yeah, I mean, eBay has been a classic use for criminal organizations for over 20 years. And now ISIS is using it. So basically what happened is that a guy put on an ad on eBay for a fake printer. And a bunch of jihadis based out of Bangladesh, the United Kingdom, and Syria started buying fake products on eBay to facilitate transactions over PayPal. Now, this is the only time that the FBI has acknowledged this, but that's only because that the guy that they're going after is pleading not guilty. We don't know how many of the guys who are pleading guilty, or how many sealed affidavits there are showing that this is how jihadis are sending money to each other. Western Union, PayPal, eBay, these people, even the snail mail system, they are using that to send money to each other to facilitate attacks here in the United States. They're using Facebook, Facebook Messenger to communicate, Telegram. It is something that the U.S. intelligence community really does not have a handle on, and it's moving at such a fast pace that something is possible, something possibly could slip through the cracks.
Well, and they probably don't have such a great handle on it because of privacy concerns. And so, it's that delicate balance between fighting terrorism and also giving people the right to privacy. Thank you so much.